Thank you very much. I want to talk about the power of money, about how the financial system, what some people would call the capitalist system, how it works and how it fails, and more than that, how we can get it to do a better job for us and for the world in which we live. And I'm really pleased to have you here today, because often when I say to people that I work in finance, I meet a very glazed expression, as though talking about finance is something that we can't do. And that seems strange to me, because we're all kind of interested in money. We can't survive without money. We want to be well paid. We'd like a loan if we want to be able to buy a house for ourselves. If we are going to run a business, we need a bank that can help us with that. And actually, if we're honest with ourselves, if we're going to solve the really big problems of the world, of economic development and taking people out of poverty, and of making sure that the world that we live in is a sustainable one, socially and environmentally, we know that we need the power of money. We kind of know that money makes the world go round, as the song says, but we don't have any agenda for how it is that we're going to achieve that. And that's extraordinary, because 30 years ago, we were willing to face a nuclear war over how it was that the power of money was used. If you go to Berlin, down through the center of the city of Berlin, of that great city, there is a line that marks where the Berlin Wall stood. From there, for 10,000 kilometers to the east, there was a regime, the communist regime, that thought that the power of money could be so pernicious that private individuals could not have the right to own productive finance. And to the west, the capitalist system that said if you try and do that, you mess up people's rights to such a degree that it is intolerable. And we were willing to go to war with that. That was the Cold War. Millions of people died, but happily not a nuclear war. And at the end of the Cold War, we kind of forgot about finance and how it's managed. And within 20 years, we'd had a banking crisis. In 2008, the Western economies were nearly brought to their knees by the failure of finance. And of course, that led to incredible resentment from people, incredible resentment. In fact, the Bank of England did this study where they asked people if they could just choose one word that would describe what they felt about bankers and the financial system. You know what one they chose as their favorite? Corrupt. That the financial system was corrupt, that it was using the power that it had to serve itself and not to serve others. It was corrupt. Gosh, and that's something to say about, this is an industry that is 8% of our gross national product. By the way, when I was born, it was about 2 or 3% of our GNP, so it's been growing as a proportion during that period. And if you think it's corrupt, that must make it feel like a hell of a monster, growing and growing, and it's just serving itself. And yet, I can't think of a wealthy country that doesn't have a sophisticated financial system. And I can't think of a poor one that does. And when I search back through the history of finance, I don't find people who are enormously wealthy. I often find people who are social reformers, social pioneers. In Germany, for example, Friedrich Raffaelson, he was a local authority administrator who knew that farmers needed some credit to be able to buy the seeds and the things that they would need for the next season, and set up the Raiffeisen banks across Europe. In my own country, Scotland, two big inventions, the first People's Savings Bank and the first funded pension, weren't started by people with money. They were started by a Church of Scotland ministers to serve society. And if you look today in the developing world, the real heroes, the real financial pioneers are there. Here's two of them, Osama Begum and Muhammad Yunus. They won the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, and they won it for lending money to poor people. In Britain, the companies that lend money to poor people are often thought of as being pretty shady. These people won the Nobel Peace Prize because they loaned money with purpose and took hundreds and thousands of people out of poverty. They managed finance to a purpose. But we've forgotten about that purpose, and we need to bring it back. It seems to me that there are 4 really important functions that we need from finance. We need it to keep our money safe. We need it to make sure that we can transact, so that you've got a credit card or a bank card. We need it to be able to share risks, so that you can insure your car, you can insure your house, you can insure a ship at sea. And most importantly, that we can borrow and lend. That we can take money from point A, where it is, to point B, where it's needed. And boy, are there places in the world where finance is needed today. And what's gone wrong, I think, is that we just forgot about those functions. I teach at universities, often in courses that are called the Masters in Finance course. They don't start by asking what's the function of finance, what is the purpose of finance. Rather, they start by thinking that you can describe finance through a very simple economic model. And unless we start to come back to the purpose of finance, we're going to discover that there's not much that's going on there that's terribly useful. In fact, Paul Volcker, he was head of the central bank in the United States. He once said that the only good invention to come out of finance during his time was the automatic teller machine, where you can get cash out of a hole in the wall. And all the other stuff was simply about distributing rents, who it was that was going to keep the cash. And by the way, if you look at the research on this, it feels a little bit like Volcker was right. Because if you look at how much the finance industry took in 1880 in America to take $1 and then reinvest it back in the economy again, it's almost exactly the same as it is today. No productivity increase whatsoever. So we've forgotten about purpose, and we need to bring that back. But we've forgotten about another thing as well. We've forgotten about whose money this is. Because the money that goes into the finance system, it's our money. I've used this study which looks at who owns the shares in European companies. Now, if you look at the share register of European companies, of course, you won't find my name on it, or your name, I would guess, as well. Actually, what you'll find is the name of big investment institutions like BlackRock or Vanguard or Amundi or Allianz. They take our money for pensions, insurance, and so on and so forth, and they reinvest it. So if we were to pull this apart, who owns European companies? It looks a bit like this. About 70% of the money is by ordinary people saving for the future, and about a third of it by wealthy investors. And the ordinary people come from all over the world. So gosh, surely we, as the people who own these companies, we should be calling them to account on our behalf. So what can we do? What can we do? I think the first thing is we need to demand that the finance industry can demonstrate its purpose. We need to demand, for example, that we have a pension system that we can save into. I'm of an age where I'm worried about a pension system, I can assure you, that we can save into, that will give us an income from the time that we retire until the time we die. We don't have that even in most advanced Western economies. We need to stop the tricks that the finance industry plays. For example, its ability to take fees from your account without telling you that it's done it. We need to be cannier, I think, as well as customers. One of the questions I sometimes ask people is, look, if you're saving for the long term for a pension at age 25, you're going to retire at 65 and perhaps die when you're 85, and the financier takes 2% a year from your pension account, how much will disappear in fees? The answer is half of your money will go. That's the arithmetic. Half of your money is going to go. So we need to build a system that is purposeful. But there's more than that. You know, we didn't have the Cold War about building a purposeful financial system. We built it about the power of finance and how that is exercised. We built it about making sure that those companies that are owned through the finance industry are behaving properly for their owners, which are you and me. And if I look back over the last 25 years, there are reasons to be cheerful. If you look back 30 years ago, the number of votes that you would have at a company's annual general meeting might be 20% of those that it was possible to cast. Today, it's more like 70%. 30 years ago, there was nobody who was campaigning in the financial markets for improvements in social, environmental performance. Today, there's organizations of organizations to make that happen. The European Responsible Investors Network, for example. I had something, involvement in the Paris negotiations over climate. And I remember one of the negotiators coming to me and saying, you know, 20 years ago, we would never have wanted investors to come to our conference because they would have tried to stop us making a deal. But actually, I presented to the conference a petition by $23 trillion worth of investors saying, please do a tougher deal than was actually done. So there are some changes. Boy, but there's a long way to go. There's so much more that we could be doing. I mean, look, here, if you're interested in the climate, why don't we tell your bank that we don't want them lending money to the building of coal-fired power stations around the world? It's your money. If your mum or dad or you have a pension, why don't we write to the pension fund manager and just say, look, it's my money that's bought shares that is commissioning and approving the directors of every big company. Can you please be sure that before you vote those shares, that you vote them in a way that is consistent with the protection of the earth? If we all did that, it would make a big difference. Look, let me just finish with one speculative thought. When the Berlin Wall fell, I think there was an optimism that we could create something in most countries of the world that looked like civil society, where citizens could harness their rights to vote, to free speech, whatever their religion, whatever their gender. That workers could harness their rights to proper employment through trade unions. That as customers, we had rights of choice where it is that we decided that we were going to do, and we could exercise those rights as well. But the one thing we didn't do was to think about how we harnessed the power of money. It's our money that makes the world go round. And the prize, if we could harness that, is enormous. Thank you.